You quit 4 days ago and you meant it. You threw the pack away. You told people, which is the part that makes it real. You made it through the third day, the one everyone warns you about where your skin feels too tight and you cannot hold a single thought for more than a few seconds. And now you are standing outside a shop at 11 at night, buying another pack, and you cannot fully explain to yourself what just happened. Here is what actually happened. It was not weakness. It was not a lack of discipline or motivation or self-respect. What took place inside your skull over those 4 days was a process so precisely engineered that if you set out to design the most addictive legal product in human history, you would arrive at something remarkably close to a cigarette. The real answer is far stranger than willpower. Start with the speed. When you inhale, nicotine reaches your brain in roughly 10 seconds. That is faster than a drug injected straight into a vein. Why does that matter? Because your brain does not learn from what is good for you. It learns from whatever happens immediately after an action. 10 seconds is close enough to be instant. Every cigarette is a perfectly timed lesson. Now look at what it does when it arrives. Nicotine is shaped closely enough like acetylcholine, one of your brain's own signaling molecules, that it slots into receptors built for something else. A key cut close enough to open a lock it was never made for. When nicotine turns those locks, neurons deep in your midbrain fire and flood dopamine into your brain's reward center. Dopamine is where almost everyone misunderstands addiction. It is not the pleasure chemical. It is closer to a highlighter. Its job is to mark an experience as significant and to generate the pull that drags you back to it later, which is why you can crave something intensely and no longer particularly enjoy it. So how do we know where this circuit even is? Because of an accident. In 1954, two researchers at McGill University, James Olds and Peter Milner, implanted an electrode into a rat's brain, slightly off target. The animal would press a lever to stimulate that region hundreds of times an hour. It ignored food. It ignored water. It kept pressing until it collapsed. And they had found the circuitry that decides what an animal treats as important. Nicotine walks into it and pulls the lever for you. 10 seconds after every inhale. 20 times a day, for years. But that is not the trap. The trap is what your brain does in response. Faced with a chemical forcing those receptors open far more often than nature intended, your brain compensates. It builds more receptors. A long-term smoker's brain carries substantially more of them than the brain of someone who has never smoked. Your brain has physically remodeled itself around the assumption that nicotine will keep arriving. So what happens between cigarettes? All those extra receptors sit empty, and empty receptors are not neutral. They generate craving, irritability, restlessness, and inability to concentrate. Your baseline has moved. The version of you that feels normal now needs nicotine simply to reach the calm a non-smoker has for free. So you smoke again, and the relief is real and immediate and completely convincing. But look at what that relief actually is. It is not pleasure. It is the removal of a withdrawal state the previous cigarette created. The cigarette has become the cure for a problem the cigarette invented. Which raises a question. If it is purely chemical, why do people relapse years after the last receptor returned to normal? Because there is a second layer, and it outlasts the chemistry entirely. Every time you smoked, your brain recorded everything around it. The first coffee of the morning, the end of a meal, the car, the first drink on a Friday night. Even Pavlov demonstrated the principle a century ago with dogs and a bell. Your version is far more sophisticated because your brain had thousands of repetitions across every meaningful context in your life, each one confirmed by a chemical reward 10 seconds later. Those cues are now wired into the same circuit, which means they trigger full cravings with no nicotine involved anywhere. This is why someone who has not smoked in 5 years can be ambushed at a wedding or in a rental car or 20 minutes after bad news. So you are not fighting one thing, you are fighting two, on completely different clocks. Which brings us to a number that deserves to be far better known. When researchers follow people who successfully quit and count backwards, most needed around 6 or more serious attempts. 6. not one heroic act of will. Sit with what that means. Relapse is not the exception to quitting. Statistically, relapse is the path through it. So, what actually shifts the odds? Unassisted willpower with no support and no medication succeeds in roughly 3 to 5% of attempts at 1 year. That is not evidence that people are weak. That is what happens when intention alone is sent against pharmacology. Everything that works better attacks one of the two layers directly. The chemical layer first. Nicotine replacement gives your receptors a slow, steady, low dose without the smoke, and without the sharp spike that teaches your brain to want more. Cochrane reviews consistently find that combining a patch with a fast-acting form, a gum, or a lozenge for breakthrough cravings works meaningfully better than either one alone. Then, the prescriptions. Varenicline sits partially inside those same receptors, easing withdrawal while blunting the reward if you do smoke. In the Eagles trial, the largest head-to-head comparison ever run, it produced the highest quit rate of any single medication. Bupropion works differently and is often chosen when low mood is part of the picture. Both are medical decisions, and that conversation belongs with a doctor rather than a video. Now, the wiring, and this is where almost everyone underinvests. Behavioral support, a quit line, a structured program, cognitive behavioral therapy, even a text message service, roughly doubles the effect of medication. Not because talking is magic, because something has to actively disconnect the coffee from the cigarette. Medication handles the receptors. Behavioral work handles everything the receptors got attached to. It also helps to know the shape of what is coming. Withdrawal peaks inside the first 3 days. Most physical symptoms fade across 2 to 4 weeks. The cues fade far more slowly over months, which is exactly why stopping medication early is one of the strongest predictors of relapse there is. People feel better, assume the fight is over, and put down their tools while the second layer is still fully active. The chemistry settles long before the habit does. So think again about the person standing outside that shop at 11 at night. They are 4 days into a confrontation with a molecule that reaches the brain in 10 seconds, a reward circuit that decides what matters, a brain rebuilt around an expectation, and several thousand rehearsals linking all of it to coffee and stress and the drive home. That is not a fair fight to walk into unarmed, but it is a fight with known odds and known tools. The receptors can be occupied, the cues can be rewired, and every attempt, including the ones that ended outside a shop at 11 at night, measurably raises the probability of the one that finally works. You did not quit 4 days ago and fail. You quit 4 days ago and you meant it, and you were 4 days into a fight nobody had told you the rules of. Now you have them.